Catholic Answers Live. Welcome. My name is Edgar Lujano, filling in for Cy Kellett, regularly podcast producer or call screener at this time. Second hour, we have Jim Blackburn taking calls on open forum, whatever you have questions on. But for the first hour, we do have Jimmy Akin from Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World, and also from the Daily Defense Podcast here with Catholic Answers. Jimmy, how are you?
I'm doing just fine, Edgar.
That's great. So apart from being just an employee here at Catholic Answers, I'm also a big fan of Jimmy Akin's Mysterious World. What do you have going on this week?
Oh, well, this Friday, so tomorrow, we have an episode dropping about a case that occurred in North Carolina. It's been called the 21st Century Poltergeist. Poltergeists, as people may know, are situations commonly, historically, in which there would be loud noises and objects would move without explanation. And historically, they've been attributed to spirits. In fact, that's what the term poltergeist means. It's German for noisy ghost. But recent research has suggested that there's another explanation for poltergeists. And today, in the 21st century, we have lots of electronic devices around us. And so we're going to be looking at the case of a young boy who seemed to cause bizarre disturbances in all kinds of electronic devices in his house without doing anything outward to cause the disturbances. And we'll be talking to one of the key investigators in the case.
Oh, great. Sounds like a fascinating topic. So I'll have to tune in tomorrow. I'm looking forward to that. All right. Well, Jimmy, shall we go to calls?
Sure.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and get Dylan to start us off, listening on YouTube. Go ahead, Dylan. Hi there, Dylan. Are you there?
Hello? Sorry, I was on mute.
No problem, Dylan. Go ahead with your question.
Hi, so I just have a question regarding Bible translations.
Okay.
And I've been currently reading from a New Jerusalem Bible, but I want to increase my more technical understanding of the Bible. Mm-hmm. So I want to read the New American Bible as well. I'm just wondering, how do those two translations compare?
Well, so if you're reading the current edition of the New American Bible, it's a few decades more recent than the New Jerusalem Bible. The New Jerusalem Bible originally was actually a French translation, which was then translated into English, and then later translated directly from the original languages, but inspired by the French version. The New American Bible, as the name suggests, is an American translation. It's produced under the auspices of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops. Both of these are translations that share a common translation philosophy. The major distinction between different types of translations has to do with the philosophy that they use. And there's really a spectrum here, but you'll commonly hear translations divided into two broad categories, which are known as literal translations. They're also called formal equivalence translations, and free translations. They're also called dynamic equivalence translations. And so the difference between them is that literal translations, to the extent possible, try to preserve the wording and the grammar and the sentence structure that is in the original languages. Whereas dynamic equivalence translations try more to convey the thought that's in the original language in a way that sounds more natural in the receptor language, in English in this case. Now, there's really a spectrum. No translation is fully literal. No translation is fully dynamic. But as categories, those can be useful. And what the New Jerusalem Bible and the New American Bible have in common is they both tend to come more from the dynamic side of the translation spectrum than the literal side. Now, I wouldn't discourage you from reading them both, but if you want to get a different perspective or on the biblical text, I would suggest adding something from the literal side of the spectrum, and that would include things like the Revised Standard Version or the English Standard Version, even various Protestant translations like the New King James Version. That's also from the literal side. But I would try to balance reading these dynamic translations with literal ones as well to get multiple different perspectives. And I think it's good and complementary that you're reading from more than one Bible, because that will, short of learning the biblical languages themselves and reading it in the original, reading multiple translations will help give you a better sense of how a verse can be rendered, because with almost any language, there are multiple ways that you could translate a single statement, and it's helpful to see some of those different ways so that you're not locked into just a single understanding of what the verse says.
Oh, I see. And just another side note, the reason I like the New Jerusalem Bible is how it preserves the divine name and all of that. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, like, is that sacrilegious or like abusing the divine name by like having it not masked by the what do you call it, Adonai or something?
Right. So I should explain this for listeners who may not be familiar with it. So God's name, his proper name in the Bible, or at least the one that's most commonly used, is Yahweh, which is represented by 4 Hebrew consonants, which are the equivalents of Y, H, W, and H. And most, beginning a century or two before the time of Christ, Jewish people began to be concerned about saying that name out loud, and they would start to use a substitute word lest they accidentally profane God's name. You know, one of the 10 commandments is don't profane God's name, don't misuse it. And they were concerned they might accidentally do that, and so they decided to build a wall around the name and not say it at all under normal circumstances. It was still actually used in the Jewish liturgy on rare annual occasions, but they decided to use a substitute word, which is Adonai, which is Hebrew for my Lord. Adon is Lord, and you add the I, and it makes it my Lord. So Adonai is my Lord. And what happened is, in the synagogue, as the lector would be reading the Hebrew text, whenever he comes to the word Yahweh, he would say Adonai. And this practice is actually reflected in the New Testament, because when the New Testament is translating the Old Testament into Greek, it doesn't translate Yahweh literally. It doesn't bring it over into just Greek letters. Instead, what it doesn't transliterate it. What it does instead is it uses the Greek word kurios, which means Lord. That's the Greek equivalent of Adonai. And this practice has been picked up in a lot of later translations. So, for example, in the New American Bible, you'll see it say things like the Lord God, and the word Lord will be in small capital letters, or small caps as they're known. And that use of Lord in small caps tells you that what's really there in Hebrew is the word Yahweh. But they're following this custom, and so they're translating it as the Lord God instead of the Lord Yahweh, or something like that. But the New Jerusalem Bible is different. It doesn't follow that custom. It does use the name Yahweh. And personally, I like that. I respect this custom of avoiding the divine name that cropped up in the centuries before Christ, immediately before Christ, because it is used in the New Testament. It's a pious custom, but it's obviously not a required custom, because if it were, then the biblical authors wouldn't have been able to write Yahweh. But it's right there in the Hebrew. And so worshipers of Yahweh didn't have a problem saying his name and variations of it originally. And so there's nothing wrong with saying his name. It's just a matter of custom, and different translations follow different customs.
All right, Dylan, we're going to go ahead and leave it right there. If you have a question for Jimmy, you can go ahead and give him a call. We have plenty of lines open. You can call us at 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884, and we'll be right back after this break.
We're here for you. Call now. Catholic Answers Live.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects home buyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Experience the incredible story of the woman who Time magazine named the most influential Catholic woman in the United States. Born Rita Rizzo, the future Mother Angelica grew up in a rough neighborhood in Canton, Ohio. Young Rita experienced abandonment, rejection, and heartache, but God touched her through a woman named Rhoda Wise. Encounter this amazing woman at the Mother Angelica Museum. Plan your visit today at motherangelicamuseum.com.
The destination for great Catholic audio programming is EWTN Podcast Central, featuring the best of EWTN radio, as well as faith-filled podcasts from our friends and affiliates across the nation, all in one place, all free. If it's central to the faith, you can find it on EWTN Podcast Central. It's like podcast heaven. Visit EWTN.com/radio/podcasts today.
Catholic Answers Live, Edgar Lujano, once again filling in for Cy Kellett, here with Jimmy Akin for the first hour. If you have a question, we still have another line open. If you're interested in asking Jimmy a question, you can reach us at 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. You can give us a call, ask Jimmy your question, which I guarantee will give you a great answer. All right, Jimmy, shall we go back to the calls?
Well, sure, as long as you're the one making the guarantee and not me. So you're the one who's got to pay up if I don't.
All right, fair enough. I better watch my words there then. Although I do have a lot of trust in you, Jimmy. I'm pretty sure you can answer almost anything. I feel like people have a lot of trust in you.
Almost, but not everything.
Right. Fair enough. All right, on that note, let's go ahead and go to, is it Bryce calling from Santa Clara, California? Bryce, go ahead with your question.
Thank you. Hey, Jimmy. I was in a Bible study recently, and we were looking at the Book of Tobit. And because people had different translations, some people had longer versions and shorter versions. And so I was wondering, what do I make of the Catholic teaching on biblical inspiration in regards to reconstructing the books of the Bible through like manuscripts and scholarship today? My personal opinion, which I'd be completely willing to revise if it weren't in with church teaching, is that the original versions are all inspired, and then I think God providentially protected it so that whatever edition we have today won't have anything, wrong in it in terms of theology, even if it's not necessarily inspired. So I was wondering, what do we make of the fact that, like maybe certain stories, like the story of the woman caught in adultery or the longer ending of Mark, might not be original, or we might have, different editions of certain books that might be longer or shorter. And just squaring that with Catholic teaching on inspiration.
Okay, well, there's a whole bunch of issues there, and I'll do my best to answer them in a concise fashion. So people all the way down through history recognized that scribes would make mistakes when they were copying books, and that applied to books of the Bible as much as any other books. And so the belief was not that God was superintending every single copy of Scripture that got made. Instead, the belief was that God superintended the composition of the original books of the Bible during the period when public revelation was still being given. And so the primary object of inspiration would be the original edition of a book that was penned by one of the biblical authors. Having said that, as long as the period was still around when public revelation was being given, God could inspire a later second or third or however a later edition of one of the biblical books. And we see him doing that in Scripture. For example, there was an original edition of the book of Jeremiah that it no longer exists because Jeremiah gave it to the king, and the king cut it up into pieces and then burned all of the pieces. And so that would have been an inspired work by the prophet Jeremiah using, his scribe Baruch, and it no longer exists. And so then Jeremiah reconstructed it and produced a longer second edition. We also see other editions of Scripture that have been adapted at a later period, but still within the time frame when public revelation was being given. An example of that would be First and Second Chronicles. First and Second Chronicles are historical books, but they draw on First and Second Samuel and First and Second Kings and Ezra and Nehemiah and Isaiah. So this is kind of a condensed sort of Reader's Digest version. I'm dating myself with that reference, but Reader's Digest used to produce a bunch of condensed books, and that's kind of what Chronicles is. Chronicles is kind of a condensation of previously inspired material. And we see the same thing happening in the New Testament, where it looks like Matthew and Luke are producing expanded editions of the Gospel of Mark. Mark is one of their principal sources, but then they add in a bunch of additional material, and so we see a second expanded edition. But all of this was happening during the age of public revelation, and so as a result, God was still superintending or inspiring the production of literary works as part of the Bible during this period. So there can be multiple editions of individual biblical books. Two particular examples of that became flashpoints at the time of the Protestant Reformation involved the books of Daniel and Esther. The original edition of Daniel appears to have been shorter, consisting of the first 12 chapters of the book and without the Song of the Three Young Men. But then later, still during the period when public revelation was being given, a second expanded edition of Daniel was produced that added chapters 13 and 14, as well as the Song of the Three Young Men. Something similar happened with Esther. The original edition of the book of Esther appears to be one where, oddly, God's name is not mentioned anywhere in the book, even though the idea of divine providence and God's care for his people is central to the book. So someone in antiquity noticed that and noticed the irony of it and said, why don't we, and this happened under God's providence, but why don't we produce an edition of this book that more clearly brings out God's role in saving his people by mentioning him and talking explicitly about what God has done for his people. And so a second expanded edition of the book of Esther was produced. Well, at the time of the Protestant Reformation, the Protestant reformers decided that they didn't like those expanded editions. They wanted to use just the original versions of Daniel and Esther, and they this was caught up in their dispute about other books like Tobit and Judith and Maccabees and so forth. And so when the Council of Trent met in the 1500s, it defined that all of the books that are considered scripture as part of the Vulgate edition, with all their parts, are considered sacred and canonical. And that most clearly applies to the parts of Daniel and Esther that had been rejected by Protestants. There was also some discussion of certain additional passages at the time at the council. There things like the longer ending of Mark and the story of the woman caught in adultery were discussed, but they didn't get mentioned in the final decree. And so there's been there can be something of a question about exactly which parts the council meant to define, because it doesn't name any. The ones that are obviously meant to be defined as sacred and canonical are the ones that Protestants were rejecting, which is the longer versions of Daniel and Esther. But when it comes to these others, you seem to have a difference of opinion. You have some people, and by the way, I recently wrote blog posts at Catholic.com on both the longer ending of Mark and on the story of the woman caught in adultery. So you can read about those for more information on those particular passages. But you have a difference of opinion. Many Catholics have said, well, they were discussed at the council, so they should be included in this decree. Therefore, they must be sacred and canonical. On the other hand, not everybody has seemed to have held that view. For example, Pope Benedict says that in his Jesus of Nazareth book, says that the authentic text of the Gospel of Mark ends in Mark 16:8. And so he considers the longer ending of Mark not to be part of the authentic text of Mark. There's more to be said about all this, including the fact that the church has zero problem with modern scholars trying to figure out what the original reading of a text was. That process is known sometimes as lower criticism. It's also called textual criticism. And it's been endorsed, for example, by Pope Pius XII. He said scholars need to do that work. They need to do their best to determine what the original of a biblical book said. Normally, that's not dealing with large passages, but just things that happen on the level of individual sentences. In terms of God preserving his word, well, he has preserved his word in the world, but that doesn't mean that it's going to always be clear what the original reading was, and there can be things that we've lost. What he has done is preserved it in a general way, and he's made sure that the church has the ability to discern doctrinal error. And so consequently, none of the, and this is one of the things the Council of Trent discussed, but none of the things that are found in the Vulgate contradict the faith. Therefore, even if not everything is clear, and even if some things may have been lost on a, very small things, we know that the Bible represents God's word and does not contain anything contrary to the faith.
How's that, Bryce?
That was a very thorough and complete answer, so thank you very much, Jimmy. That really helped.
No problem, and actually that's a very condensed and brief answer, but but there's a lot more that could be said.
All right, Bryce. Well, thank you so much for your question. We'll move on quickly here to Keith, listening in Palm Bay, Florida. Keith, go right ahead with your question.
Yes, hi everyone. I asked this question yesterday, but the people filling in didn't have an answer, and it's about World War I combat rosaries. Have you ever heard of those, Jimmy?
I may have heard of them. I don't have a clear memory of them, but I would infer from the name that they were rosaries that were used by combat soldiers during World War I. Did you have a more specific question about them?
Well, if you knew a lot about them, I have what I believe is a World War I combat rosary, and it's very old. It's all metal chain. And if you had more information, I was going to ask you questions about proper identification of it. But it doesn't seem like you'd be able to tell me anything other than what I basically know already, which is it may or may not be an original World War I combat rosary.
Yeah, I'd suggest I don't, and I suspect other people appearing on this show wouldn't either, because this show is oriented towards apologetics and catechesis and doctrine, and it sounds like you might want to contact someone from the Antiques Roadshow. An antiques expert would be the kind of person who would likely have more knowledge of that. Yeah.
Okay, I was just hoping, seeing you seem to know pretty much everything, that you might have heard of this.
Well, as I said at the beginning, I don't know everything, and this is one area where I don't have an abundance of information. Sorry.
Okay, well, I enjoy the show quite a bit just the same. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Keith. Appreciate it. I'm going to have to be careful with my guarantees next time I say something. But that was, either way, a good answer. So thanks, Jimmy.
Thank you.
All right. So if you have a question, go ahead and give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884. If you have a question for Jimmy. Before I head over to the break, I have just a quick little pitch here from Carrie. If you're interested in potentially going to the Catholic Answers Conference, then we have a great deal available for you. We have a promo code EARLY that'll give you $50 off of the conference ticket. We have a lot of incredible speakers coming from Dr. Scott Hahn as a guest speaker, Sister Regina Marie Gorman, Dale Ahlquist, Dr. Francis Beckwith, and one of my old professors, Dr. Logan Gage. So if you want to learn a little more about the Catholic Answers Conference, you can check it out at CatholicAnswersConference.com. The theme for the conference is I Believe in God. So anything in regards to apologetics against atheists or agnosticism, you know where to go. Catholic Answers Live.
This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns its attention to the question of God in an age of unbelief. Join us September 21st through 24th in San Diego for I Believe in God, featuring very special guest, Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of speakers. Spend 4 fun days with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
What if the voice of your deepest doubts about Catholicism rose up in the form of a human being and challenged you to defend your most foundational beliefs? That's the task apologist Trent Horn took upon himself in his new book, Devil's Advocate, a dialogue with his own best objections against the faith that he professes and defends. You can stand up against your doubts, and Trent will show you how. Pick up your copy of Devil's Advocate today at shop.catholic.com or at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Catholic Answers Live. Once again, Edgar filling in for Cy Kellett today. There's a lot of buzz in Catholic news today about an incorruptible that was found in Missouri. And I saw, Jimmy, you recently had an article on that on our Indulgences blog on Catholic.com. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. I first heard about this after Mass last Sunday when I ran into Chris Check and his wife, and he mentioned it to me and was showing me pictures on his phone. And then earlier this week, I got an inquiry from Thomas Graff, who edits our Indulgences blog, about could I write about it? And so I did. I talked about what's happened in Missouri. Basically, after 4 years in the ground, the unembalmed, so she was not embalmed, foundress of a religious order has survived with remarkably little change from when she was first buried, despite the fact that her coffin, it was a simple wooden coffin, it was not airtight, and it was cracked, and water and dirt had been getting into it. And so despite all that, which you would think would normally cause rapid deterioration, her body is remarkably well preserved. So I talk about that. I also talk about the evidential value of incorruptibility, because this is something that shifted over time. In the past, going back centuries, if a body was found to be incorrupt after death, it would kind of be taken as this really has to be the hand of God. This no natural phenomena would produce this. But today we do know of phenomena that would result in similar effects. If a body, for example, is buried in an arid climate like in the sands of Egypt, it may naturally mummify. In fact, the artificial mummies that Egyptians are known for making may have been inspired by finding naturally mummified bodies in the desert. Needless to say, Missouri is not Egypt. It is not an arid climate. Water was getting into the coffin. Also, you can be remarkably well preserved in a watery environment. There have been bodies found at the bottom of peat bogs in Europe, and because of the airless environment in the peat at the bottom of the peat bog, the microbes don't have the oxygen they need to do their work, and so the body ends up being remarkably well preserved. Well, needless to say, Sister Wilhelmina, the religious woman in question, was not buried in a bog. So it doesn't look like there's any obvious natural explanation for why she would be so well preserved. And the hand of God may very well be involved here, but we need to be careful because there are natural processes, and we may not have discovered them all yet. There are natural processes that can retard decay. And so the church doesn't currently look on incorruptibility as if it's an ironclad proof of sainthood. It's notable when it happens, but you need more evidence than that. So you can check out my piece on the Catholic Answers Indulgences blog. It's called Incorrupt in Missouri, ? For more information.
Great. Thank you. Thanks, Jimmy. And one other question. Have you had a chance to tackle incorruptibility in your Mysterious World podcast?
I haven't yet. I plan to.
Okay.
But this will give people kind of a capsule summary of the kind of thing I'm likely to say.
Great. Well, go ahead.
And who knows, I may later develop an episode just about Sister Wilhelmina and use that as a way of addressing the subject.
Well, I would second that. I would love to hear something like that. So please, if on my behalf and others, please do that because I would love to hear more about it. All right. Well, lines are all full, so let's go back to the phones here. Let's start off with Michael listening in Omaha, Nebraska. Michael, go right ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks for taking the call. Okay, I'm a Protestant, and I'm wondering, because I'm not completely sold on the idea of purgatory. I'm wondering where you can point me in my Bible that, because I don't have Maccabees or if there's a spot in my Bible that could better outline the purgatory and be pretty much like a reason for purgatory or.
Okay, so I'm glad you're already aware of the Second Maccabees 15 passage, which it does really closely reflect the idea of purgatory. And I know it's not in your Bible, and I respect your views on that. I would say that one of the things it does do, though, even if you don't consider it a canonical book, is it documents that beliefs like purgatory were already found in Judaism prior to the time of Christ, because it's describing events that occurred about 160 years BC. And so this documents that purgatory-like beliefs were already part of Judaism even before the time of Christ. And they continued to be part of Judaism afterwards. Jews today have a prayer, it's known as the Mourner's Kaddish, and they say it for 11 months after a loved one dies so that God will, bless the person and who's died and bring them to him and give them rest and so forth. And the reason they say it for 11 months is because it would be considered an insult to your loved one to imply they needed a full year of purification. But purgatory continued to be part of Judaism and it's still part of it today. Also, it's part of Christianity, except in the Protestant community. It's understood, it can be articulated different ways, but it's understood to reflect a reality in Catholicism and in Eastern Orthodoxy and in Oriental Orthodoxy and in the Assyrian Church of the East. It's really only in the Protestant community that this idea has been rejected. So when we see something part of Jewish belief before the time of Christ, that continued on to be part of Jewish belief after the time of Christ, and that continued in all the different branches of Christianity except a recent one that only came up 500 years ago. That kind of provides some context for how we ought to look at passages in Scripture. And one of the passages that is in your Bible is 1 Corinthians 3. In 1 Corinthians 3, Paul talks about how everyone's work is going to be tested by fire. He uses the analogy of building a temple, and he says if you've built with gold and silver and precious stones, which none of which are flammable, then the temple that you've built will survive the fire, and you'll receive a reward. On the other hand, he says if you have built with wood, hay, and straw, all of which are flammable, then the temple will be burned up. And he then says something very interesting. He says, but the person in this situation will be saved, but as through flame. And so we're not talking about the damned here, because the damned aren't saved. So this reflects saved people who have not lived in the best way possible. They haven't built using the best materials, to use his metaphor. We have saved people who will be subject to testing. Their work's going to be tested, and they can have an experience that's like running out of a burning building, being saved, but through flames. And so, the image is you're here in your temple that you've built, you're worshiping God, it's tested by fire, and if it burns up, you've got to run out of it. You will be saved, you will get to heaven, but there is going to be this testing experience first, and it may not be pleasant for you. That's why Paul's giving this warning. So that, to my mind, especially in the context we just discussed, is very strongly suggestive of purgatory. Now, I'd also mention something else. So, Michael, you're Protestant. I'm Catholic, but we're both human beings. Do you expect that by the end of your life, you will be morally perfect? Will you be a perfect person in your last moment of life?
Oh, I can answer that with a sound no.
Okay. I would say the same thing.
I am not perfect at all.
Okay. So here's a follow-up question. Will you be a perfect person when you stand before God in heaven? Or will you be a sinner in heaven?
In all honesty, I'm praying for forgiveness, but I don't know if purgatory is real and I get purified through that, and then stand before God, then yes, I'll be blemish free. But if purgatory is not real, then I'll be there with all of my baggage.
Okay.
Not to speak lightly on the subject, but
yeah. Well, I would encourage you to be optimistic in this regard, because one of the things the book of Revelation says is that nothing unclean shall ever enter the heavenly city. And so if we're heading to the heavenly city, we're going to be perfect by the time we get there. We're not going to be unclean anymore. And so between when we're in the glory of heaven and our last moment of life, it seems that we need some purification, and that God will do that purification. In fact, he's already been purifying us over the course of this life. Once we become believers in Jesus, he starts working his grace in our hearts. He starts helping us, train us away from sinful habits, and we grow in holiness through the process of sanctification. But because we're not, at least most of us, perfectly holy when we die, we need that process of sanctification completed, and that's what purgatory is. It's just the final stage of sanctification. The church doesn't teach that it takes time. It may happen in the twinkling of an eye. For people at the end of the world when Jesus comes back, it will happen in the twinkling of an eye. But it is a real process that we need so that we can be perfectly happy with God in heaven.
Michael, thank you so much for your question. We have a book written by our friend Carlo Broussard called Purgatory is for Real, and I would love to send that out to you for free. So if you want to just hang on the line, Thomas will pick up and he'll get that information from you to send you the book. So thanks, Michael, for that call. We're going to go ahead on our final break for this hour, and when we come back, we'll continue answering questions with Jimmy.
Hello, this is Archbishop Salvatore Cordileone of San Francisco. Keep your dial tuned to Catholic Answers Live.
You've heard that St. Paul Street Evangelization supports hundreds of teams of evangelists sharing the good news. But did you know that some of these teams are public prayer stations? Set up a sign on the sidewalk and offer prayer and encouragement to those you encounter. Everyone needs prayer. Try this new method of witnessing to Jesus. Contact St. Paul Street Evangelization to get started at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
I don't like looking back. I prefer to look forward and keep moving forward. There's plenty to cover. I do a lot of research and try to dig out the bits and pieces of a life or of an agenda that people don't want to talk about.
The World Over with Raymond Arroyo. Tonight, 8 Eastern on EWTN Radio and Television.
Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano here with Jimmy Akin, answering your questions in this open forum. Shall we return to calls, Jimmy?
Sure.
All right, great. Let's go ahead with Lorraine calling from Chicago. Lorraine, go ahead with your question.
Oh, I was asking a question. Oh, I'm sorry. Hello. I'm sorry.
Hi there.
Say hello.
You're on the air, Lorraine. What's your question?
I was asking a question. When Jesus and his angels come back to get all his holy ones, the souls in heaven, would they see this? Would they see that? What do you think?
Yeah, they would. The way that, and where you can read about this is in Paul's letter to the Thessalonians. It's his first letter to the Thessalonians, and specifically, you want to look in 1 Thessalonians chapter 4. What the idea that it expresses there is that Jesus, when he returns, he's going to descend from heaven, and he's going to bring with him the saints from heaven. So there will be angels who come with him, but there will also be the saints who have died in Jesus, and then he will gather his saints from the earth as well. And Paul says the dead will rise first, and then he says we, meaning all Christians, all of the saints, all of the people who are saved, will always be with Jesus. And so Jesus, and what this passage reflects is a custom that existed in the ancient world. If you had a king or a great general, someone who had won a battle, who was coming to visit your city, the population of the city would go out to meet him on the road before he gets to the city, and then they would escort him back into the city. And that's what's happening here. Jesus, our great king, is returning to us from heaven, and so we will be gathered to be with Jesus, so we can then escort him back to the earth, and we'll have the new heaven and the new earth and live with him forever. And so the souls that are coming back with Jesus, they will get their bodies, because Paul says the dead will rise first. So those are souls of people who were in heaven. They came back with Jesus. They're reunited with their bodies. They're resurrected. And then they're caught up with us, the living, to be with Jesus and escorted back down. So, those souls will be aware of what's going on, and they'll actually be there, and they'll have their bodies back.
How's that, Lorraine?
Okay, thank you.
All right.
No problem.
Thanks for the call, Lorraine. If you have a question for Jimmy Akin, you can give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-31-TRUTH. Moving on to Ron calling from Florida. Ron, go right ahead with your question.
Hey, Edgar. Hey, Jimmy. How you doing tonight?
Doing okay. What's your question, Ron?
Okay, I've got a question that I already submitted to Google Bard AI. So I've got a secular answer, and I wanted to get a good Catholic answer. Here's the question. Why doesn't Judaism believe Jesus Christ is the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies?
Well, some Jews do. There are Hebrew Catholics, there are Messianic Jews, there are Jews who think that Jesus is the Christ. Now, many Jews don't. And the question can be answered different ways. Sociologically, I would say, well, it's because the same reason a lot of Christians are Christians, because they were raised that way. But if you want to look at the evidential basis and like what arguments would a Jewish apologist make for why he doesn't believe in that Jesus is the Christ, it would basically come down. I mean, there are a few different things you could cite, but the main one, the thing that you hear most, is that Jesus didn't fulfill all of the prophecies that the Jewish people have expected the Messiah to fulfill. It's in Jesus's own day, it was common for people to believe that a political Messiah was coming, who was going to start a war and kick out the Romans and restore kingship to Israel and things like that, and cause the Gentile nations to stop having wars and stop persecuting Israel and so forth. And that didn't happen, because Jesus determined he wasn't that kind of a Messiah. He said, my kingdom is not of this world. If it were, my followers would fight for me. But he wasn't intending to be that kind of Messiah. He was going to fulfill other messianic prophecies that said that the Messiah would suffer and die to redeem people from their sins. And so he fulfilled those prophecies. Now, from a Christian point of view, Christ ultimately will bring peace to the world. He will reorder the nations and cause wars and persecutions to cease, but he does that at his second coming, not at his first. And so from a Christian point of view, we would say there's more than one stream of messianic prophecy in the Old Testament. Christ fulfilled some of the prophecies at his first coming, and he'll fulfill the other prophecies at his second coming. But he's already shown us enough by fulfilling the prophecies at his first coming that he is the Messiah, and we can trust him to come back and fulfill the others. From people who are coming from a non-Christian Jewish point of view, though, want to see those other prophecies fulfilled before they're prepared to acknowledge him as the Messiah.
Great. Well, Bard got one of your answers anyway, Jimmy.
Okay, good. I'm glad it's not totally wrong.
No, they threw a few others out at us, but thank you very much, Jimmy. I'm glad to be a Patreon.
Oh, thank you so much.
Well, thanks for your question, Ron. Really appreciate it. Moving on to Jennifer calling from Winnipeg, Canada. Jennifer, go right ahead with your question.
Hi, Jimmy. Thank you for taking my call. My question is about the four temperaments and Catholicism, like the temperaments that describe patterns of different personalities, sanguine, melancholic. I've noticed that many in the Cathosphere have really onboarded the idea of the four temperaments into their lives. Like, I see Catholic parenting books based on the four temperaments, priests on YouTube talking about your spirituality based on your temperament. I even met my husband through Catholic Match Online, and when you signed up, you took the personality test and you were assigned a temperament. So my question is, why is this part of the Cathosphere, and is there something uniquely Catholic about it?
It's not uniquely Catholic. This is actually based on a theory of medicine that is known as humoral medicine. The idea in humoral medicine, and this goes back centuries. In fact, if memory serves, it goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. But so it's not uniquely Catholic. It's not even uniquely Christian. But the idea in humoral medicine is that humans contain four substances known as humors, like blood, phlegm, and I guess black bile and yellow bile, if I recall correctly. And the idea in humoral medicine is that people's state of health is determined by how much of which of these four humors they have. So, for example, you might get a disease like the cold or malaria or the flu if you have an imbalance in your humors. But also because people, feel bad or happy depending on their state of health, It also was thought that certain people just have more or less of one of these humors than other people do, and that's why they feel the way they do, and that's why they act the way they do. And that kind of led to a classification of personality types based on the 4 humors. Now, humoral medicine is not the current theory in medicine, like other theories like the heroic theory of medicine and the miasmic theory of medicine. The humoral theory has basically been discredited as a matter of science. Well, we do have those humors. We also have other substances in our bodies that are not humors. And it's not an imbalance in the humors that causes diseases. That was, for example, let's say you got too much blood, you're too sanguine. Well, the obvious solution would be, let's do bloodletting. We need to get that blood level down in you so you don't have too much blood and you'll start feeling better. Well, we don't tend to do bloodletting anymore. Instead, disease has been explained by what's known as the germ theory, which holds that microorganisms like bacteria and viruses cause most illnesses. And there are other factors as well, like genetics and diet and things like that affect our health and our feelings. That's not to say that you can't use the 4 humors as a way of classifying personalities. You can divide people up into any number of categories you want. And if you want to put them in 4 categories that correspond to what historically the 4 humors were thought to produce, you can put them into those categories based, say, on a personality test. But what we shouldn't do is attribute mystical or scientific significance to this system of classification. There are other systems of classification that work just as well or even better. So it's kind of a tradition that you see in some Catholic circles to use these classifications. It ultimately comes from humoral medicine, but and it can still be used today, but we shouldn't take it particularly seriously.
Jennifer, I'm going to leave it right there. Trying to get one more call with Jimmy. So thank you for that. Brandon from Amarillo, if you can be quick, we can get you an answer.
Hi. Thank you, Jimmy, for bringing me to the church, but I'll be quick here. So I have a little bit of scrupulosity. There's a couple of verses I've been trying to understand how to make them jive with our, infinitely forgiving God. And it's like First John 3:6, where anyone who sins has not seen Him, or where it says anyone born of God does not commit sin. And our Lord's, declaration that we are to be perfect, like our Father in heaven.
Okay, so let me.
Those things.
Yeah, so when John is talking about anyone who knows or has seen Jesus or God does not sin, he means that if you're sincerely following God, you're going to struggle against sin. You're not just going to give in to it. When it talks about he does not commit sin, he's using the Greek present tense, and in Greek, the present tense tends to connote an ongoing action. So he means a person does not just keep on sinning. He tries to struggle and fight against the sin. When Jesus says be perfect, well, that's the goal. That doesn't mean we're all going to make it to the goal in this life, but that's our reference point that we should strive for. What we should not do, especially if we're scrupulous, is let the perfect become the enemy of the good, because people who are scrupulous can drive themselves crazy by trying to be perfect in a way that ends up torturing them and paralyzes them. So what we need to do, instead of torturing and paralyzing ourselves, is say, what would a reasonable person do? And you can think of role models, like I would think of Pope Benedict or John Paul II, and say, okay, what would they do? I mean, is this a situation where they would relax and say, well, I could always do better, but this is good enough for now and I need to move on to other things? Think rationally and live in a human manner, in modo humano. And so we shouldn't be we should strive for perfection, but we should also be comfortable recognizing we're not going to make it. It may be our goal, but we don't have the knowledge or the ability to do the absolutely perfect thing all of the time. Just do good and trust God for the rest.
All right, Brandon, thank you so much for your call. On that note, the first hour of today is all done, Jimmy.
Hey!
Look at that. Well, thank you so much. Really appreciate you joining me and working with me. I know that I'm not the typical psych-hellet, but here we are.
No, you did good.
Yeah,
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. All right. Well, second hour, we have Jim Blackburn. So Gregory, Cam, Marty, and Will, hang in there. We will get to your questions. And if you have a call, there's still a couple lines open. It's 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884. And you are listening to Catholic Answers Live. Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano once again filling in for Cy Kellett. If you've ever called into the show, you're normally talking to me as a call screener, but today we have me hosting and Jordan call screening. So thank you, Jordan, for covering that. I appreciate it. All right, so today's second hour, we have Jim Blackburn. He is the founder and president of Catholic Questions, which I would assume it works pretty close to what we do here at Catholic Answers. Right, Jim?
It does. In fact, when I was at Catholic Answers, there was a Q&A department. And for almost 10 years, I was the supervisor of that department. And in that department, we would take one-on-one questions anytime, during the business hours. People could call in, email, whatever. And we had a staff of apologists who would answer those questions, get back to the person with an answer and maybe some additional resources. Now, as Catholic Answers has grown and the focus has become more on the speakers and the School of Apologetics and the conference and those kinds of things, where you have much larger audiences, eventually Catholic Answers couldn't sustain the Q&A department anymore. So when Catholic Answers ended that, shortly after that, I started Catholic Questions. So we've kind of picked up that area of one-on-one answering questions, Q&A apologetics. And we've been doing it for 2.5 years now. And it started out as kind of a temporary thing just to, Christmas time, during the holiday season, to see if or how it would catch on. And people wanted us to continue it. And still today, we're going 4 apologists. I have, plus me, so 5 of us altogether now. We're all volunteers, but it's a full-time venture for me. And we answer as many questions as we can. We answer every question we get. And it takes us, once in a while, we'll get to some questions on the same day, but it's usually the next day, possibly 2 days later. So you can't get quite the instant feedback you get here on Catholic Answers Live, but nonetheless, it's a venue to get your questions answered. So, yeah, the website is CatholicQuestions.com. We have, you can ask your question right from there. You can email us also. You can call us. You can write us a letter. And we also have apps for both the Android phones and for iPhones and iPads and just about anything that has apps from the Google Play Store or the Apple Store. So,
great.
Any way you wanted to ask a question, we're trying to make it available to you.
Great. So you can also do kind of text kind of thing. So you're texting your friend about Catholicism. Is that kind of one of the means you can do it?
Yeah, we don't have a texting set up yet, although that's something we've talked about. But it's more we're going to get back to you by email. So we need an email address. However you're going to ask your question, if it's through the apps or through the online venue, we need an email address from you, and that's how we're going to respond.
Gotcha. All right, great. Well, there's plenty of Catholic questions on the line. If you want to go ahead and get to them, we can provide Catholic answers. How about, what do you say?
Sure, let's do that.
All right, great. Let's go ahead and start off with Gregory calling from Santa Clarita, California. Gregory, go right ahead with your question.
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Thank you for taking my call. So I have a question related to, or a couple of questions related to the Divine Mercy devotion. I'm an enthusiast. I love it. It's changed my life, but I get grief from both sides of the Catholic spectrum on it, and I have some questions. On one side, from progressive friends, I'm told that St. Faustina was an anti-Semite and that shouldn't be the practice. And on the more traditional spectrum, I get demonic, horrible, reject modernity. And I understand that there's a history with the devotion, and it was suppressed for a time, or whatever the right term is, but people have been practicing it for a long time. So my question is this: why are people still not liking it now? Why is it okay? And how do I deal with these people when they're pushing back against my involvement with the devotion?
Okay. Well, let me preface this by saying, let's see, it's Gregory, right? By saying that no one is obligated to have or embrace any particular devotion that the church offers. So it's okay for someone to say, I don't want to do the Divine Mercy Chaplet. I don't want the indulgence on Divine Mercy Sunday. These kinds of things. If a person chooses not to have to embrace the Divine Mercy devotion, that's okay. It's not required by the faith. Now, on the other hand, Pope John Paul II was very, very much into the Divine Mercy devotion. He, in fact, really promulgated a lot of, with Divine Mercy Sunday and the indulgence for on Divine Mercy Sunday, these kinds of things. Pope John Paul II was very active with this devotion, and he really promoted it a lot. So we have a lot of people today who are very much into that devotion. They do embrace it quite a bit. I would say for anyone who does not, and if you're trying to convince someone that you found it to be very helpful to you, and you really think someone else should, especially if it's someone who has problems with it, then you might encourage them to read Pope John Paul II's writings on the Divine Mercy Sunday, on just Divine Mercy itself, as well as on the devotion and Divine Mercy Sunday. You can find that he has an encyclical on Divine Mercy. Encourage them to read those things, but if they still choose not to, that there's nothing opposed to the faith in the idea of Divine Mercy Sunday and the Divine Mercy devotion. A person doesn't have to, let's say, have a devotion to Saint Faustina to embrace the Divine Mercy devotion itself. So you might make a separation there as well, Gregory. Beyond that, I wouldn't push people too hard on it. There are people who embrace the other devotions and prefer not to embrace this one. That's okay. We can't all do every one of the devotions that are out there. And so don't treat it as though it's a matter of faith that they have to embrace the devotion itself. Certainly the teaching of Divine Mercy, of God's Divine Mercy, is something that must be embraced. But the devotion, the particular devotion of Divine Mercy, is not something that anyone has to. Okay, Gregory?
I think I may have asked the question wrong. I'm not pushing it on anyone. I'm being told it's problematic that I'm doing it.
Okay, and what are they saying the problem is?
So,
you mentioned they have a problem with Saint Faustina.
Right. So just historically, it's suppressed. We're not supposed to do it. It takes away from the Sacred Heart. On the other side of the equation, she was an anti-Semite, so don't do it. And so that's really the issue. I'm a live and let live. Like, do whatever devotion you want to do, but why am I being attacked because I have a devotion to it and I have a connection to it? So that's really what I'm asking about.
Okay, well, you might respond to that with the fact that St. Faustina had been canonized as saint in the Catholic Church, and so it could be that some of the problems people have with St. Faustina, these people you're talking to, might misunderstand it, might misunderstand her. Maybe they misunderstand some of her writings. So you might go down that road by talking about what specifically is the problem with their particular problems with St. Faustina, and then and go from there. But this is kind of a one-on-one thing, Gregory. You might contact us at Catholic Questions off the air, and give us some more specifics. Once you go back and forth with someone, get them to pinpoint exactly what it is, why it is they think you are doing something wrong. And if because the Divine Mercy devotion is associated with St. Faustina, maybe they don't have a problem with the devotion itself, but they have a problem with St. Faustina, then let's talk about that, and we'll try to help you with that. We can look back at the canonization process for her, show that to the challengers, and see how they respond to that. I wouldn't question the fact that she's a saint. I mean, this is really an infallible declaration. We know that she's in heaven. So whatever, in fact, any saint we look at might have a history of something. We're all sinners before we're saints, and Saint Faustina is no exception to that. So there may be some things in her past that a person might have difficulty with. but we can look at how she overcame those, and through the grace of God and with the church, and so we should not hold that against her anymore. If God's not holding that against her anymore, we can have an approach like that. So contact me, Gregory. Just go to CatholicQuestions.com and send me a message there, and maybe wait to do that until you've had this conversation. And just broad challenges are not good enough. Let's try to pinpoint what it is they specifically have a problem with, and then we'll pick it up from there and try to help you with that.
Perfect. Thank you so much for taking my call. This was helpful.
Okay.
All right.
I will send you an
You're
email.
welcome.
All right. Thank you, Gregory, for that call. Let's go ahead and go on our first break for the hour. If you have a question, there's one line open. You can give us a call at 888-318-7884. That's 888-318-7884. And we'll be right back after this break.
Let us help you with your question today on Catholic Answers Live.
Do you have a question but prefer to ask it privately? Catholic Questions can help. Go to CatholicQuestions.com to ask your question online, email us, drop us a letter, or give us a call. Longtime Catholic Answers Live apologist and author Jim Blackburn or another Catholic Questions apologist will be happy to assist you. Catholic Questions proudly supports Catholic Answers Live, so visit us at CatholicQuestions.com today. That's CatholicQuestions.com.
This is Bernadette Boguski, Executive Director of WCCR Cleveland, AM 1260 The Rock. Why do we need Catholic radio? To reach the hearts, minds, and souls of those who are searching for deeper meaning and don't know where to turn. To bring clarity to a world full of lies and confusion, and to share the good news of joy and mercy with a world so desperate for the truth.
The world needs EWTN Catholic Radio, now more than ever.
Catholic Answers Live, Edgar Lujano, radio and podcast producer here at Catholic Answers. And I guess since I am the podcast producer, I should really promote the podcast. Why not? So if you are a podcast buff, you can listen to any of our podcasts at CatholicAnswersPodcast.com. Anything from this live show to Catholic Answers Focus, Council of Trent, the Trent Horn, not the actual council. You also have Shameless Popery with Joe Heschmeyer, Sunday Catholic Word with Carlo Broussard, and of course, The Daily Defense with Jimmy Akin. So plenty of podcasts for anybody, from going into deep dives with Joe, or just taking about 3 minutes with Jimmy Akin. So, all right. On that note, Jim, shall we continue with the phones?
Yeah, let's go.
All right, great. We're going to move on with going to Cam, listening from Dallas, Texas. Cam, go right ahead with your question.
Hello.
Hi, Cam.
Thank you for taking my call. So my question is simply, why does the Vatican allow for the canonization of non-Catholic saints? Example, St. Gregory Palamas is venerated in the Eastern Catholic churches. He was, I believe, an Orthodox monk. So this has been very puzzling to me. I understand that many of the Eastern Catholic churches were formerly Orthodox and then came into communion with Rome. I'm pretty new to the faith, so if I'm wrong, please correct me. But this is just simply, it's weird to me, especially in regards to salvation and how it relates to non-Catholics. So that's my question.
Okay, Cam, let me ask you something then. Do you believe that a non-Catholic can go to heaven?
I don't know. I've read the catechism. I have a copy of the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and I've been reading through it, and what I've been getting from the book is there is little to no salvation outside of the Catholic Church. Like I said, new to the faith. Please forgive me.
Okay.
But yeah, that's my answer.
Sorry to put you on the spot there, but I think that the important thing to recognize here is that the Church does recognize that all salvation comes through Christ, through the Catholic Church, but it's possible for those outside the Catholic Church to be saved, but they will still be saved through Christ and through the Catholic Church. Now, the Eastern Orthodox churches are extremely close to Catholicism in their faith. They have valid apostolic succession. They have the same 7 sacraments we have. There's very little that separates Eastern Orthodoxy from Catholicism. Now, St. Gregory Palamas, to my knowledge, he's never been canonized as saint by the Catholic Church. I believe he was canonized in the Eastern Orthodox churches. That doesn't mean that we as Catholics can't believe he is a saint. In fact, because we know that there can be salvation for someone who is an Eastern Orthodox monk, as you mentioned, or even Protestant, or even a non-Christian. It's possible for salvation. Now, we're probably not going to recognize ever someone who's not a Christian as a saint. It would, I think, take a lot for the church to ever do that. But certainly someone who is of an Eastern Orthodox tradition, very close, very little that separates them from Catholicism. If this person has, there has been evidence, say, for this person's sainthood, we can recognize that as Catholics. Now, as I mentioned, St. Gregory Palamas, I'm not certain that he's ever been officially recognized as a saint in the Catholic Church or declared a saint, but I do know there is some devotion to him, and that's perfectly fine for Catholics to believe that he is a saint. When our brothers in the Eastern Orthodox churches recognize him as a saint, that's right there a pretty good start. So, Cam, I would encourage you to go to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, where it's talks about, and this is in the paragraph 800s roughly, the 4 marks of the church. So it's one holy, Catholic, and apostolic church. And when it talks about Catholic, the church mentions in there, the Catechism mentions that while there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church, right, it looks at this doctrine, this teaching of the church, that there's no salvation outside the Catholic Church. And the Catechism explains that in Vatican II, this teaching was reformulated in a positive way. Now, it's the same teaching, it's always been there, but instead of making it sound so negative, the church reformulated it in a positive way. And instead of saying there is no salvation outside the Catholic Church, it now says, you'll read this in the Catechism, that all salvation comes through Christ, through the Catholic Church. After that paragraph, it goes on to mention that there are elements of salvation, or God uses other churches, other communities, other faiths in some ways to bring the people closer to Him. And God can work with these people, and if a person dies in the grace of God, he's lived his life according to the grace he's received, and he's responded to it well, he dies in a state of grace, that person too may be saved. He will still be saved through the Catholic Church, through Christ, but he may not have been recognized as a Catholic in this life. So it's important to recognize that, and I think that will get you over the hump of recognizing why St. Gregory Palamas, for example, could be someone that would be venerated by some Catholics. Okay, Cam?
Yes, that answers my question. Thank you.
All right. Okay. Thank you, Cam. Thank you for your question. Jim, I was thinking about recently, I guess a similar situation in regards to potential, or people who are in heaven and saints with Christ are the 21 Coptic martyrs that were recently recognized as martyrs by Pope Francis. We actually have a blog post by Father Hugh Barber, kind of not talking about the differences, but acknowledging and recognizing, though, even though they are not fully part of the Catholic Church, that these men, these Coptic martyrs, were true witnesses of Christ because of their actions. So if people are interested in reading that, it's from our Indulgences blog. Father Hugh Barber wrote it back in actually earlier this month on the 16th. So people, if you're interested in checking that out, just go to Catholic.com.
I was going to say, you bring up another good point in that the church recognizes that while baptism is ordinarily necessary for salvation, God is not bound by the sacrament of baptism. He can provide the fruits, the graces of baptism, such as with martyrs. So I mean, those people were never actually officially card-carrying Catholic. They were not baptized Catholics, and yet they died for their faith, and they are considered saints. So I just thought that was a great example.
Yeah, absolutely. And like I mentioned, if you're interested in reading that small blog post by Father Hugh Barber on our indulgences page, you can go to Catholic.com, click on magazine, and you should be able to find that blog post. All right, moving on, we're going to go to Marty, listening in Lincoln, Nebraska. Marty, go right ahead with your question.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. So this is from Matthew 16:18. I grew up hearing about Peter and the church and this revelation, and that this Greek was big rock, little rock. That's what I grew up hearing. And as I'm older, I'm reading footnotes in a St. Joseph Study Bible, and it talks about how there's really not much difference between those two words, and that the original language was Aramaic, and the word was, I think, kephas. I think that's how it's pronounced. And so I guess my question is, was the original Aramaic, did it also say little rock, big rock? Or I understand kind of in the Greek the masculine and feminine nouns. And I understand when you translate things, they don't always translate very well from one language to another. In fact, sometimes things don't translate at all. And could you just help me make sense of all this? I understand it's probably tied to that verse 19 that Jesus says, I'll give you the keys to the kingdom. And it would seem to me in the Greek that he's actually saying that to Peter. I will give you, Peter, the keys to the kingdom of heaven.
Yes.
Just need help unpacking all that.
Okay. We know that Jesus, as in his common everyday language, was Aramaic. And so when he said this to St. Peter in Matthew 16, as you're quoting there, he likely said, used the word kepha, which just means rock. There's not that distinction, as you mentioned, between big rock and little rock, or the feminine and the masculine with this. He used the word rock. So it would be like in English saying, Peter, you are a rock, and on this rock I build my church. However, when the gospel writers, when Matthew wrote his gospel, he wrote in Greek, and he had to translate that word into the Greek word. He had to transfer kepha into Greek. And I guess the way he chose to do that was he used Petra, which is would be the feminine, and for the little rock, say, to first name, to say that when Jesus first says rock, you are Petra, and on this rock I will build my church. But then he uses the masculine because he's naming Peter the rock. He's naming him rock. He calls him Petros instead of Petras, the masculine versus the feminine. So there's a difference in the Greek, and this is where we find a challenge to this sometimes. People look at this and say, you're just a little rock, and I'm going to build my church on this big rock. No, there's really not that distinction. There wouldn't be that distinction in the Aramaic. So I would recommend that you go to Catholic.com. There's a tract on this that goes through the Aramaic, goes through the Greek, and explains this and gets to the challenges a little more than we probably can here on the air. The title of the tract is Peter the Rock, and you can find that in the tract section at Catholic.com.
How's that, Marty?
Okay, that's a great answer. I really appreciate that, and I will definitely look that up. Could I just make a kind of a follow-up thing that I'm thinking about?
Yeah, quickly. We're coming up on a break here, but go ahead.
Okay. So I'm wondering when Matthew wrote this in Greek, or whoever put it in Greek, was it like because Peter as Pope was already established, they didn't think that would be like an issue of people confusing that?
Well, I think probably he was trying to translate rock, just rock itself, from the Aramaic, Kepha. Say, maybe he even heard Jesus say this to Peter, in the most common word that would be used for that, and that was then the Petra. But when he got to naming Peter, he had to use the masculine version because Peter is a man. I hear the music, so we'll have to leave it at that.
Yeah, we'll leave it at that, Marty. Thank you so much. If you want to follow up, give us a call back a different day. This is Catholic Answers Live. We'll be right back.
This year, the Catholic Answers Conference turns its attention to the question of God in an age of unbelief. Join us September 21st through 24th in San Diego for I Believe in God, featuring very special guest, Scott Hahn, and an all-star lineup of speakers. Spend 4 fun days with your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. Seats are still available, but going fast. Use promo code EARLY to save $50 and register today at CatholicAnswersConference.com.
In These 12, The Gospel Through the Apostles' Eyes, best-selling author Rod Bennett gives a riveting re-examination of gospel events from the ground floor perspective of Christ's own hand-picked successors. In his trademark storytelling style, Bennett movingly depicts what it was like for the apostles to witness Jesus' teaching and miracles up close. Why did he call them, and what did he intend for them to do? Order your copy of These 12 today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
Want to know more about the origins of the Catholic Church? Joe Heschmeyer explores the beginnings of Christianity. In the early church was the Catholic Church. Joe digs deep into the words and actions of those who lived right after the apostles to refute anti-Catholic claims of how the faith was lived back then. Order your copy of The Early Church Was the Catholic Church today at shop.catholic.com or get it at a good Catholic bookstore near you.
If you're not a Bible scholar, the full message of how the Sunday Mass readings fit together can be tough to comprehend. Apologist Carlo Broussard is here to help. Join Carlo every Friday for the Sunday Catholic Word podcast. In each episode, he unpacks the scripture readings for that Sunday and brings them all together so you can better understand and defend the faith. Visit SundayCatholicWord.com to subscribe. That's SundayCatholicWord.com.
Catholic Answers Live. Edgar Lujano once again filling in for the great Cy Kellitz. I'm going to read a little pitch here that Carrie gave me. Are you concerned about how well equipped the young people in your life, or you for that matter, are to engage in conversations about faith with atheists, agnostics, or those who are indifferent to religion? Then this year's Catholic Answers Conference is for you and for them. Plan now on making a family trip to this year's Catholic Answers Conference, I Believe in God, from September 21st to the 24th in beautiful sunny San Diego. Many of our speakers have strong backgrounds in speaking to young people and adults about the faith, making them particularly well suited to the task of teaching us what we need to know. Don't miss this opportunity to deepen your own faith and gain the knowledge and skills to help the young people in your life grow in theirs. Our special guests are Professors Scott Hahn, Sister Regina Marie Gorman, Dale Ahlquist, Dr. Francis Beckwith, and Dr. Logan Gage, plus Catholic Answers Live host Cy Kellitz, and all your favorite Catholic Answers apologists. This conference is expected to sell out early, so reserve your seat today by going to CatholicAnswersConference.com. And if you're looking to stay at the conference venue, we've arranged a very special room rate for about $175. Visit CatholicAnswersConference.com to make room reservations. The promo code EARLY saves you $50 off your conference ticket. Plus, conference tickets make a great gift for dads and for graduates. So we hope to see you there. It's going to be a fun conference. We were able to attend it last year, and I think this year's topic is going to be just as fun. All right, Jim, shall we continue with the calls? I think all lines are full and ready to talk to you.
Yeah, let's go.
All right, great. Well, we'll go ahead with Will from Stafford, Virginia. Go right ahead with your question, Will.
Hello.
Hi, I will.
I'm asking about the. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Go right ahead.
I'm asking about the authority the church has in state affairs. Specifically, I'm thinking about instances in history where popes have blessed particular monarchs, like Alexander II blessed William the Conqueror when he went into England. So, does the church hold that certain leaders can be, in some sense, appointed by God, like a lot of monarchs have claimed? And I'm not saying it as a bad thing. I'm just curious what the Catholic doctrine is, if that makes sense.
Okay, the first thing that comes to my mind is in Romans 13, Saint Paul tells us, and I'm pulling this up now. Saint Paul tells us that I'm starting with verse 1. Let every person be subject to the governing authorities, for there is no authority except from God, and those that exist have been instituted by God. Now, Paul is not talking about any particular leader, any particular politician, any particular conqueror here. He's talking about, though, in a general sense, this is how humanity works, and there are people in authority, and we should respect that authority and trust that authority, in as much as it's not opposed to God. Now, any law, let's say, that would contradict divine law or church law, we can't support that. But if it's not contrary to the law of the church or the law of God in general, then that's something that we should be subject to. We should pay our taxes. We should support the government in a sense, and giving a blessing. Let's say a papal blessing, or a local bishop giving a blessing to the local politicians. That's a perfectly wonderful, beautiful thing. How does that will then relate to your question? Is there
That's a good
what
start,
more was
I
there to it?
guess. Sorry.
No, go ahead. I just go ahead.
You have certain monarchies throughout history that claim they have some sort of mandate of heaven, if that makes sense, that the line of the monarchy has the blessing of God. Is the Catholic position that there is credence to that claim in some cases?
No, I mean the Catholic Church doesn't doesn't go that far to say that this person is in this office because God wants that person in that office. I would say outside of the papacy. I mean, in the papacy, when we have a conclave and the bishops, the cardinals voting in the conclave, there's certain guidance of the Holy Spirit, and the new pope is elected, and we believe that there is something divine going on there. The pope is in his office by divine appointment, in a sense, even though he's been appointed, by human beings. There's the Holy Spirit guiding this process. Outside of that, there's no guarantee of that, and the Church doesn't give its blessing to anyone claiming that. The monarchies and such, we're going to pray for them. I mean, there are many people subject to the monarchs and subject to the monarchy itself. So we hope and pray that the monarchy will look out for the genuine good of the people. And so there's nothing wrong with praying for them, blessing the monarchy, blessing the President of the United States, blessing our governors and our politicians, and praying for them. In fact, we should be doing that. Now, where we part ways with them, we want to try to change that. I had somebody ask a question recently, at Catholic Questions. Is it a sin? I mean, if these people are in office because God has designed it that way, then is it a sin for us to oppose that and try to, vote them out of office or impeach them or vote for someone else to take their place? Well, that's a misunderstanding of of Paul's words in Romans. It's a misunderstanding of how God acts, or how the Church understands that God acts in this way. The office itself is what is more of an institution of God. The person who's in that is actually should be a person who recognizes he's to be of service, and he's there by the grace of God, but he can be removed from that office. And in as much as he opposes God or he opposes truth, or opposes the teaching of the church, we can work to get that person out of that office. So I hope that helps, Will.
Okay, yeah, thank you. That all makes sense. Thanks for taking my call.
All right, thank you for your call, Will. We're going to keep moving on ahead. We have all the lines are full, so we want to get as many people on the air as possible. Moving on to David from Columbia, South Carolina, listening on St. Peter's Radio. David, go right ahead with your question.
Oh, yes. Thank you for taking my call. I had a question about the Old Testament writings that when they were given to the Jewish people from God, and were they protected by infallibility when interpreting Scripture? And if so, how did they get the prophecies about the coming Messiah wrong? And why didn't they recognize Jesus as the Messiah when he walked among them?
That's a great question, David. And no, there was no magisterium. As we have in the Catholic Church, there was not a magisterium in Judaism before the time of Christ. This is something that Jesus gave us. Jesus appointed Peter as the head of the apostles. He became what today we call the Pope. He was the first one of a line of now 260 some popes. And the bishops in communion with him, we recognize this as the teaching office of the church. We call that the magisterium. This is something that was divinely put into place by Christ. And this is not something that we see in the Old Testament. We do see, we see the Pharisees, we see the Sadducees, and we have the Sanhedrin, and there are lawgivers and interpreters of the Jewish the Old Testament, but there was not a magisterium in place as there is now, as Christ gave us in the Catholic Church. So it's not surprising, really, to find that even at the time of Jesus, we have the Sadducees and the Pharisees, and this really division among Judaism, even in the first century. Those Jews who recognized Jesus recognized him because of the teaching that they heard from him and from his disciples, in later going down the road, from the magisterium of the church. Peter and the apostles preaching, and Peter and the apostles appointing others as bishops and priests in the churches that they would establish. And this magisterium is something that's new with Jesus' church, with Christianity, distinct from what there was in Judaism. Okay, David?
Oh, that's such a perfect answer. That's what I was looking for. You really cleared up the confusion. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, David. Thank you so much for your call. We'll go ahead and go to our final break, and right after the break, we'll pick it up with some more questions and some more answers on Catholic Answers Live.
Hang on, Catholic Answers Live will return in a moment.
Underwriting for Catholic Answers Live is provided by Real Estate for Life. Real Estate for Life connects homebuyers and sellers to real estate agents while supporting pro-life organizations. On the web at realestateforlife.org.
Do you love sharing the gospel and want to learn to be more effective? Join the St. Paul Street Evangelization online School of Evangelization. You will learn to build bridges of trust and make disciples by befriending strangers, proclaiming the gospel, inviting people to the church, and praying with others. We'll ask for a pledge of financial support, but if you are unable to give, we'll give you a membership at no cost. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com. That's streetevangelization.com.
The most original and exclusive Catholic content is on EWTN Radio.
You know, we talk story with each of our very unique guests for the whole hour, so that you can go deep with us as you yourself pursue your own story of heroic virtue and as you pursue intimacy with God.
The Bear Wozniak Adventure, Saturday night, 6 Eastern on EWTN Radio.
Catholic Answers Live. Open Forum with Jim Blackburn. Jim, as I was telling you earlier, you were actually an apologist here at Catholic Answers when I first started listening. And I think as a young man, one thing that I struggled a bit with was scrupulosity. And I didn't know what to name. I didn't know what it was. I didn't actually know the term until later. So can you maybe just talk a little bit about that scrupulosity and kind of how to...
Sure. Yeah, scrupulosity is something we want to stay away from because it recognizes sin where there is no sin. The word itself, someone who scruples, someone who you might think when we use the word scruples, someone who has scruples have a good connotation to it because it's someone who cares about what he does, that what he does is right and doesn't want to do what's wrong. But scrupulosity is a gross exaggeration of that, and it sees sin where there is no sin. And this is something that psychologically today, in psychology, if you want to go there, is associated with OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder. It's where someone is just obsessed with every action, everything that they do in such a way that he always believes he's sinning, or he believes that sometimes when he does something and it's not a sin, he thinks that it is a sin. And that can just be turmoil for a person who suffers from this. A good way to overcome it is to recognize, as the Church teaches in the Catechism, that mortal sin is what separates us from God. So while we need to be cautious of venial sin, and we want to stay away from venial sin, don't scruple too much about those. Let's look at what the mortal sins are and really make sure we're staying away from those. And mortal sins are sins that are grave matter, meaning that it's something that separates us from friendship with God. But for it to be a mortal sin, we must commit this grave matter, this grave act, knowing how serious it is and freely choosing it. It's a personal choice that we're choosing to do this. So you cannot commit a mortal sin without knowing it and willing it, and knowing how serious the sin is, and still freely choosing it. That can be helpful for someone who suffers from scrupulosity because oftentimes a scrupulous person will say, well, I didn't mean to do this, but I think I sinned, or is this a serious sin, or is it not as serious as enough to be a grave sin? Well, if you don't know, if you don't have that knowledge, then it's not, you're not going to be committing a mortal sin. You cannot commit a mortal sin without knowing it and willing it. So there are some great helps out there. Scrupulous Anonymous on the internet is a great resource. Father Thomas Santa, I believe, is who founded that, and I believe it's still there. There are books on scrupulosity, but I find that when we have people contact us at Catholic Questions sometimes with who are scrupulous, and we have to explain to them that we are not spiritual directors. We're here from an apologetics perspective. We want to help people understand the faith, explain it, and defend it from those who would challenge it, against those who would challenge it. So if someone's calling us or contacting us and saying, did I sin here? Should I go to confession? These kinds of things, we refer them to spiritual directors. And I would encourage anyone who thinks he might suffer from scrupulosity to get in touch with a spiritual director. It could be your confessor. It doesn't have to be, though, a confessor. It doesn't have to be an ordained priest. It can be, just check with your local parish and find out if there are spiritual directors locally who can help you. Make an appointment, sit down, and then trust what your spiritual director tells you. And a while of trusting this and building this confidence, a person can overcome scrupulosity. So that was a great question. I know that it's not an uncommon matter, and it's a serious matter that a lot of people suffer from. Oh, yeah. And I struggle to help them. I'm not a spiritual director, but I know when they contact us at Catholic Questions that they need help, and so we just try to refer anyone who suffers from scrupulosity to those experts who can help them with spiritual direction.
Great. Yeah, I'm glad you shared those resources. All right, let's move on. Let's go to Giuseppe calling from Connecticut, listening on Catholic.com. Giuseppe, go right ahead with your question.
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing well. How are you?
All right. So my question was, following the Battle of Lepanto, Pope Pius V instituted the Feast of Our Lady of Victory. And then subsequently, in many following years, many following popes, it was changed to Our Lady of the Rosary. Now, my question is, would asking the intercession of Our Lady of Victory be all right? Or because the popes have changed the feast to Our Lady of the Rosary, are we only able to ask Our Lady's intercession under that title?
Okay. Well, I would ask you this. When you're asking for Our Lady of Victory's intercession, and that's just a title, who are you asking for intercession?
Well, we're asking Our Lady.
Mary.
I mean, so
Mary,
everybody's,
our Mother in heaven,
depending on her title, what you're asking for her intercession, there's Our Lady of Sorrows, and there's specific devotions for that, so you would ask for certain things depending on that, and Our Lady of Perpetual Help has certain things that whatever you're struggling with or whatever you want help with, you ask depending on what her title is.
Okay. The title can help us focus on what it is we're asking for. But we have to keep in mind that all of these different titles for Mary are just that. And as long as who we're praying to, who we're asking to intercede for us is Mary, then, and we call her Our Lady of Victory or Our Lady of the Rosary or in any of the titles for Mary, then that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, I'm talking about on a personal level. Now, at a parish level, or if there's a public type of devotion going on, I don't know that the church may have suppressed the use of certain titles so that the church, the local parish or the local diocese, isn't to venerate a saint under a particular title. But on a personal level, if we're our intention is to pray to Mary, that's who we're praying to, and we're using that title or a title that we've come up with on our own, that can be fine. Don't we talked about scrupulosity before? Don't scruple about this. Mary knows when you're asking for her intercession, and if you call her by Our Lady of Victory, it's not going to somehow reduce the effectiveness of your prayers or the effectiveness of her prayers. But again, Giuseppe, I'm talking on a personal level, so that's perfectly fine.
All right.
All right. Thank you, Giuseppe, for that question. We're going to move on because we have plenty of callers still on the line that we want to get to. So moving on to Bo, calling from Oklahoma, listening on 97.3 FM. Bo, go right ahead with your question.
Hello. So my question is about Paedo Communion, and why does the Roman Rite not practice it while the Byzantine Rite do? Like, why do they practice it rather than... I guess that's my question. Why does the Byzantine question practice it and the Roman Rite doesn't?
I'm sorry. Why does the Roman Rite practice what?
Oh, no. So why does the Byzantine Rite practice Paedo Communion and the Roman Rite doesn't?
Oh, okay. Well, they're two different traditions. In the Eastern Rite Catholic churches, the Byzantine Rite, we have, when a child is baptized, the child receives actually 3 sacraments: baptism, confirmation, and Eucharist. Now, the reception of the Eucharist doesn't continue after that until the child reaches the age of reason and then understands what he's receiving and then begins receiving again at that point. But why withhold graces that we can? I mean, I'm kind of more on the Eastern Orthodox side of this. No, I'm not saying either one is wrong, but they're just two different traditions. In the Roman Rite, infants are baptized, but that's the only sacrament that the child receives until he attains the use of reason, say around 7 years old. At that point, because he's capable of committing a mortal sin, he'll go to confession, and then he'll receive his first communion. And then later, as he learns more about the faith, he'll usually, in many dioceses, it's around early teens, the child will receive the sacrament of confirmation. There are advocates in the Roman Rite to begin having our children, our infants, at least baptized and confirmed as infants. Why withhold the grace of confirmation until the early teen years? It'd be wonderful to at least have access to that grace before that. So, Bo, does that answer your question? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's what I was talking about. Yeah, I was actually unaware that they didn't continue on with it. They just received the sacrament, those three sacraments at the same time. I thought they continued on with the partaking of the Eucharist. So, but that answered my question. Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. I would mention that when we look at the gifts of the Holy Spirit, which are received at confirmation, many of those gifts are not something that an infant or a child younger than the age of reason is going to have access to. So that grace is not going to be effective until that child gets to an age where those graces, those gifts, are really accessible to him. But still, the idea of having that grace available as soon as that child has the ability to receive that grace, I understand why some people advocate for that. But yes, reception of communion, even in the Byzantine Rite, is not something that continues after that first communion as an infant until the child reaches an age where he understands what it is.
Okay, yeah. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Bo. Thanks for that question. So I know there's a lot of conversations in regards to, especially in the Western Rite, the Roman Rite, of restored order for the sacraments, right? Mm-hmm. Can you talk a little bit about that? Kind of, do you know a little bit of the history? Do you know when that changed and kind of a little bit of the advocacy for the restored order?
Well, I certainly know about the advocacy for it. I know that there are. I mean, I don't know of a particular organization that advocates for it, but I know many people who advocate for it. In fact, I myself have advocated not just for that, but for more preparation, just like we prepare our children for the sacrament of first confession and then first communion. We want to make sure the child understands he's receiving sacrament and what that sacrament means, and recognizes the real presence and in the Eucharist, and the need for contrition in confession, and these actually being forgiven for sins. Confirmation programs are often 2 years where the children will be taught about the gifts of the Holy Spirit and get them thinking about how these graces can become effective in their lives and such. But then I think we kind of drop the ball because what do most people go on to do after that? Well, some will enter holy orders, but most go on to marriage. Why don't we bring in sacramental preparation for marriage while they're still children, say maybe in those later teen years, a couple of years of that, so we don't have so many failed marriages within the Catholic Church. Anyway, I don't know if that exactly addressed your question.
Yeah, no,
but
that's great. Yeah, perfect timing too. As you hear the music, we're coming to the end of the show. So, Jim Blackburn, thank you so much for taking this time and answering these Catholic questions to these Catholic and giving some Catholic answers. So
thanks for having me. God bless you.
Yeah, and remind us the website that you're on.
CatholicQuestions.com.
All right, thank you very much. And Jason, Joshua, Chris, apologies. Give us a call back tomorrow. We do have open forum with Joe the first hour, and second hour we have ethics with Father Ted Pacholczyk. You have been listening to Catholic Answers Live, and we'll catch you tomorrow.